A saying in politics is to never let a good crisis go to waste. For example, in the rubble of victory in World War II, the United Kingdom created the NHS, or FDR's New Deal in the wake of the Great Recession. Today, we find ourselves in another crisis, and new ideas of saving the world are being pumped out left, right, and centre. But one that is being considered more seriously is modern monetary theory, which is something you likely heard of, and if you didn't, you will soon. And I don't mean in the future, I mean probably next week. MMT is a macroeconomic theory that disregards the boogeyman of deficits and debt and says that we can, in fact, have nice things. But I think a history of the modern economy is of paramount importance to fully gauge MMT. The history of the world economy begins after World War II. The world was in a considerably bad place, and most of Europe was essentially Swiss cheese. To mend this problem, an assembly of the world's biggest economies and the USA had a conference at Bretton Woods, in which the nations of the world agreed upon the gold standard, the IMF or International Monetary Fund, and putting an economic straitjacket on their currencies. Many nations had their own currencies, and some currencies are unstable and inflate easily. To assuage this predicament, the Bretton Woods system prescribed that many countries peg their currencies to the stable asset gold, which basically meant the dollar, as in the 50s the USA had 55% of the world's gold reserves. But why peg your currency to gold? Because if you give me 10 Irish punts for my British Jaguar car today, the punts as they are pegged to gold will be worth roughly the same thing tomorrow. So that I am not getting a bum deal for taking your dodgy currency in exchange for my solid and stable car. If your neighbour offered to swap their garden gnome for your bench, would you accept? You would want assurances that the next shower of rain won't melt the garden gnome. That's what pegging a currency to gold does. Ensures what your neighbour has given you is not going to be worthless tomorrow. Anyways, this system ushered in an era of global trade and unimaginable growth in the Western world, as everyone was willing to trade as they were making safe exchanges with their gold-backed dollars. The world was coming up Millhouse, except Ireland. We were doing quite bad. The United States during this time was living in the golden age of capitalism and was the world's central bank in this Bretton Woods epoch. At this point you must understand Keynesianism, named after John Maynard Keynes, a British economist of the early 20th century. Keynesianism is more concerned with spending to get full employment and improving living standards, and to finance that spending the government will raise taxes and issue bonds to pay debt as to avoid inflation, and is a more centrally planned way of doing an economy. Keynesianism is closely associated with Labour parties and social democratic parties today. Anyways, in the USA, General turned President Dwight D. Eisenhower enacted an infrastructure boom to get the economy in full swing, as, funnily enough, he was very impressed with the Autobahn. Eisenhower, a Republican, was running an economy similarly to Sweden's. Yes, the Sweden Republicans called socialists. The United States spent large amounts of money on its citizens' infrastructure and job creation. Generally, everyone who wasn't a minority was quite happy. Levittown, suburbanization, shopping malls and consumer culture were the result of this high level of growth. The biggest vote of confidence for the future is having babies, and during this era our beloved boomers were born. This golden age of capitalism created a boom in other economies besides the USA, like European nations and Japan, who were increasingly unsure about using US dollars for trade, as the USA was printing enormous amounts of money to fund the Vietnam War. To ameliorate the situation, President Nixon, looking American decline right in the eyes, done a swift and slick recuperation of global supremacy and ended the gold standard, which de facto ended the Bretton Woods system, which actually saved the United States. And by the mid-70s, many countries adopted fiat currencies, or free-floating currencies. Fiat meaning let it be done in Latin, as now there was no economic straitjacket. The adoption of fiat currencies in favour of the gold standard loosened restrictions on growth. The gold standard was temporal, it had to end. If, for example, there was less and less gold, then there would be less printed money, which means the value of your money was going to go up, and this would result in people stuffing their cash under mattresses. Why spend your money on a microwave today when you can buy a car tomorrow? Once we switched over to fiat currencies, the deficit hawks entered the fray. Milton Friedman, the opposite to John Maynard Keynes, ushered in the ideology of monetarism, which was adopted by Thatcher and Reagan. This formulated the ideology of neoliberalism, which places a primacy on the market capitalism and believes strongly in profit making as an incentive to make better decisions. The most emblematic motto of this neoliberal monetarist ideology is the economy is like a household budget, and that government debt and deficits in the economy are analogous to a mismanaged family household. And to fix the debt issue, what does a responsible family do? To make cutbacks and economize. These cutbacks are called austerity, which is derived from the old French meaning cruelty. Neoliberalism is the reason you hear, where does the money come from? Because it assumes we all live in a house called the economy, and that we cannot spend what we don't have in our purses or wallets, and that we must make money to spend money. These concepts are true if you are a household, not if you are an economy. Nevertheless, neoliberalism favors cutting government spending on public goods, privatization of public assets like trains and buses, but most importantly is preoccupied with balanced budgets as debt is of paramount importance. In summary, Keynesianism is spend then save, whereas neoliberalism is save then spend. In 2008, the first great crash since 1929 happened, and in response to said crash and the following recession, world governments imposed austerity. Austerity was very unpopular, and by the time the economy started normalizing, if you could call it normal, there was a recognition of austerity's negative impacts, especially in the European Union. Once again, due to the coronavirus, we find ourselves in a serious crisis. But this time around, austerity has been ruled out in favour of a more Keynesian approach, and many have begun talking more seriously about modern monetary theory. So I would like to say that modern monetary theory is not that modern. It is essentially a hard to define and less respected Keynesian economic system, which is pretty simple. When the economy is in a rut, spend to get it out. And when the economy is doing good, don't spend and balance your books then. The naysayers instantaneously cry inflation and clamour to point out Venezuela and Weimar Germany, which is a bad faith argument as the United States is obviously not these countries. MMT's most famous proponent is of course Stephanie Kelton, an economics advisor to Bernie Sanders during his campaign. She is the author of the book The Deficit Myth, the myth being that unbalanced books lead to disasters, which has turned out to be not as true as neoliberals believed. MMT postulates that economies that are the sovereign issuer of their own currencies don't have to worry about debt repayments, as they can print the money to pay off their debt should they need, which negates the issue of debt. MMT is presented as a new radical idea, but this solution is kind of obvious. It's the inflation that was a hindrance to such ideas. So, what about the inflation? Well, taxation. Pulling money out of the economy and slowing it down by hiking up interest rates on loans is the answer to that. As well, taxation will be paying salaries for civil servants, etc., etc. So the amount of money being printed will also be paying salaries, which are essential to an economy. The chance of inflation is minimal, and the dollar is still the world's reserve currency for global trade, but a detractor may posit that the global downturn in trade could negatively affect the dollar, as it is the lingua franca of currencies, or that the euro could replace it. And this is a valid criticism, only if global trade mattered to the United States. The USA uses trade to enforce its hegemony. It trades with the world and facilitates world trade as a flex. The Biden administration will be operating as America first with a human face, as seen with the vaccine hoarding. So, global trade for the USA is of little concern as it has one major asset. The great irony of the joke about millennials buying avocado toast is that they are a great consumer base to support a domestic economy. The USA imports goods, which means it is not reliant on other nations for its economy, unlike Ireland and Germany. So the printers can go burr and nobody's going to do anything about it. MMT is essentially reverting to an old way of heavy spending by the central government to spur economic growth, somewhat of a return to the Eisenhower days. You see this in the Biden presidency as his administration has pledged $2 trillion in a recovery fund. But this is not just a recovery fund, this is a Rebuilding America fund. By having the central government issue currency for infrastructure booms, they will pay for themselves in the long run, and they are essential to an upwardly mobile economy. Take the Green New Deal, which is emblematic of this ideology. The amount of jobs and revenue that will be generated from such projects will pay for itself and be universally beneficial, or globally if we're talking climate. So, what are the criticisms of MMT? The best one I seen was that it is a policy polemic for depressed times and that its answers to inflation are just not good enough. But most importantly, it's only relative to the USA. The big question is MMT the future? No, it isn't. It's the present. Joe Biden is enacting modern monetary theory. The EU is somewhat doing it, but it can't forever. We're taking a more Keynesian approach as the European Union is structurally built with Germany's fear of inflation, as seen in the Stability and Growth Pact, a hot topic in European politics. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, do consider a like, it's greatly appreciated.